Hey Gitty Gang, it's Michael Capato. I wanted to talk to you about something that I've been doing with some of my guitars lately. You know, this is sort of one of those hobbies that's a lot like Lay's potato chips where you can't eat just one. You don't stop at just one, you keep building. And if you're like me, you know, you watch every Del Puckett or Shane Spiel video. You read every email, you look at the tips on Cigar Box Nation, and you start incorporating each of these little tips and tricks into your builds, and your builds get better and better and more sophisticated. And then what might happen, or often happens, is that those first initial builds sort of fall through the cracks. They become wall hangings. So what I decided to do this last few months was to go over like the first 10 guitars I made and apply the techniques I'm doing to guitar 50 or 60 now on them, and improving them and making them more playable. And in the case of a couple of them that I didn't think would be, they became sellable. A couple of them, probably like guitar 9 and 10 that I went back and revisited, when I added some of those improvements, the guitars were great and people bought them. You know, some of the things like Del Puckett talked about in his video of adding a back angle to the neck so the neck slopes down and you get a lower action. I mean, that's a very good tip, important way to make guitars really playable. So I went through several of the guitars, and there's one guitar that I saved to the end that kind of stuck out. Some of you may be familiar with it. It was one that was a CB Gitty feature in their email newsletter a couple of years ago. It's also one that I did with a 3-part YouTube video where I showed the different techniques I utilized in it. It's the guitar that I set out to make look like a 150-year-old barn find. Something that great-great-grandpa made to strum on his porch that ended up in Grandpa's barn, and somebody found it and did like a Shane Spiel guitarchaeology thing and rescued it and restrung it and made it playable. The only trouble with that guitar was I've grown a lot both as a builder and a player. When I started out, it was a high action fretless guitar to play slide. Well, I no longer play slide. I do play fretted guitar. And at the time I didn't make fretted guitars, and now I'm totally comfortable with putting fretboards on and doing fret jobs. So this one gathered dust. I mean, it was a special guitar. Like the video showed, I used some really interesting techniques to give it that aged look. I used a combination of steel wool soaked in vinegar to give it that barnwoody rust ebonizer effect. Over that I did a layer of gray paint which I wiped away, and then I did brown and black washes on top of it, so the wood has just this barnwood, for lack of a better term, character. And I aged or relic the cheap Chinese tuners with vinegar. I put the tuners in a little container inside a Tupperware container where I poured about an inch of vinegar in surrounding it, sealed it up overnight, and it gave the tuners an aged look. I tried it with the Gitty tuners, but even the economy tuners are too well made to try to ruin that way. And the final technique that people were excited about was the one I stole from railroaders, model railroading, to recreate rust on things by using a combination of wet paint, dried spices like cinnamon and chili powder and nutmeg, different shades of red and brown, salt and black paint. So it was an exciting guitar to do, but like I said, I wasn't playing it anymore. So it was the last project and I wanted to show it to you. And it also kind of brings up a little bit of advice that I have that was brought up in a forum post on Friends Facebook page, Friends of Gitty page, a few weeks back, where somebody had a grounding issue with this guitar he made, and we all suggested he go into the guitar and add a ground, and he said he couldn't because he glued the box shut. And that was something that it came up in this build, not that I glued the box shut, but I had actually glued the neck inside the box to the box, and that posed a problem when I wanted to replace the neck with a neck that I could fret. And as you can see, this is the old neck, and I had to pretty much saw away what I could, and then I had to chisel out and sand out the leftover rest of the neck that was inside the box. And this is the final result of the guitar. I had to replace the neck because the original one I couldn't really put a fretboard on, so I did a new neck with a piece of pallet wood, and I did the same painting techniques, and I added the new fretboard. But one of the things I want to point out is I no longer, and I haven't in like 30 builds, no longer glue my necks in. I always use a couple of screws with a couple of those little screw covers to make it look better. And it's really the same for most of my guitars in the front. This one actually I kept the hinge and the latch, but normally I screw in the top at 4 corners with more of those decorated covers so you can get into the guitar and make changes, which in this case I did. I did the new neck, I did a new fretboard, I also added one of my hand wound pickups, one of the flat bucker, pancake bucker style that I wound, replacing an old single coil in it, and I also added a bridge rod piezo where there was actually a disc piezo under it. So I thought I'd share it with you and add that piece of advice of go back on those guitars, use what you've learned to make those playable again. And the biggest piece of advice really, and I'm sure there's a double entendre in this someplace, don't glue when you can screw.